Hello and welcome back to the Wheel Crime Podcast, the podcast where two ladies play games, mumble profanities, and laugh way too often. Listener discretion is advised.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hello. Welcome back to the Wheel of Crime podcast. My name is Jen.
I think I'm Emily. I mean, I can't really be sure, but
TBD. Yeah. we're not sure yet.
Oh, good God. Well, that was fun. Usually I could rock and roll with our preview. Apparently not today. That's not a thing.
Disclaimer.
Oh, yeah, our preview disclaimer. Yeah, that thing.
Whatever. It is what it is. I feel like a reflection of how this week has been.
Oh, definitely. Very, very chaotic. Which, you would think for it being November now, that things would be low-key, because it's like, oh, time to relax before Christmas. No, I've not known a day of rest. Ever, I don't think. But especially not this week.
Yeah, I feel you there. The strike is still happening as of when we're recording this, so I am still unemployed. Yeah, it's been great. I love that for me. It's been over 5 months now, so I'm living my dream.
Yeah, the stress is just mounting and mounting. It's a very enjoyable experience.
Yeah, I'm just, I'm like, oh, hell yeah. I love this for me.
It gives me stress. Well, since this is our first episode post, not post Halloween. Well, kind of post Halloween. It's the Friday now after Halloween, because Halloween was on a Tuesday this year. So would you like to share with the listeners what kind of Halloween-y activities you did and how much fun you had?
Yeah, I went to this trio of haunted houses with some pals, and then I went and saw the Five Nights at Freddy's movie on actual Halloween.
Did you actually see Five Nights at Freddy's?
Yeah, that was our Halloween movie this year.
I thought you were going to see some weird, I don't know, ghosty, gory movie that is somehow always out around Halloween. I can't believe you went to go see Five Nights at Freddy's. That's hilarious.
Why?
What do you mean, why? It's a huge internet sensation of a video game.
Yeah, I know what Five Nights at Freddy's is, but I don't know. I feel like it's interesting because I've heard all the memes about the movie and everything. I feel like it's not as bad as people are making it out to be. It's just a horror movie. I don't know.
See,
it's kind of fun, kind of spooky.
So what makes this interesting to me is that for any newer listeners that might not be aware of my family dynamic, I'm the oldest of 6. So my younger siblings were very into Five Nights at Freddy's when it came out, and a lot of streamers on YouTube were playing the game and doing reaction videos and stuff. And they're really into the lore of the game, what happens between the games and what games mean what and all this. And the main complaint I've heard from them is that they did not like Five Nights at Freddy's the movie because the lore is inaccurate for what the game says the lore is. But then the argument, because it's in particular my 2 youngest siblings, they love to argue about anything. And so one of them is saying that the movie's based off a book that was written about the video game, which I have no idea about any of this stuff. And then the other one is well, the video game came first. It should be accurate to the video game if the book was written based off the video game and the book is something different and the video game was the first thing. Anyways, apparently, huge point of contention. And then, and apparently the movie, because both of them also went and saw the movie, they also very mixed reactions about the movie because the one expected it to be way scarier, I guess. And then the other one thought that it was just not enough plot devices to make it creepy, I guess. Not enough bringing up some of the stuff that made the video games creepy, which I guess is fair. I wouldn't know. I'm not going to be seeing the movie, and I know very minimal about anything to do with the franchise. So I'm wow, I know stuff, kind of.
Yeah, I knew of Five Nights at Freddy's before going into the movie, so I kind of like a general idea of like what it's about, but like I didn't play the game. I don't know anything about the game or a book. I didn't even know there was a book.
Has John played the game at all? Like, does he play like spooky horror video games? Like, I know he plays some that usually have like plot attached to it, but like, does he play like spooky games that are just meant to be spooky?
He does. I don't think he's played Five Nights at Freddy's. Like, genuinely, before you said that, I didn't know it was like a game. I thought it was just a YouTube thing.
Yeah, because kind of what made it really, really big was there's a couple big name streamers that stream video games that made it like into a huge thing. But the game is a jump scare game, so it's
Right.
kind of like you remember when we were all playing Among Us and you have tasks to do and stuff? That's kind of like
Yeah.
what that game is. You have shit you need to do in the game, but like at the same time you need to avoid the costumed creatures that are coming for your ass. So there's like just
Right.
like you have to discover stuff and move around and do certain types of tasks and then not get caught is basically the premise of the game.
I guess that makes sense. I don't know. It was fine.
Do you think you're going to play the game now? Has the movie inspired you?
No. Probably not. I was not that hard of a stan where I'm like, I must consume all content related to this IP. So I'm just gonna take the movie for what it was and move on with my life.
Sounds like a very adult, mature response. I do feel like the game or the movie was made more for kind of people my siblings' age who that was more of like their type of
Yeah,
thing. We might have aged out of that a little bit.
I think so.
Yeah.
Like I don't know. There was some like creepy aspects because I love horror films, right?
Mhm.
So like that's why I was there. It was the Halloween movie
That's why I
this
was
year,
curious,
so I was just
because yeah, like you play video games, but you don't play like all types of video games. That's why I was curious about what your thought was on the movie, because that's kind of what my thought was, is that people, but that would have been made more for people who played the game.
yeah. I feel like as like a standalone movie, not really knowing that much about the background IPs or whatever, it was fine. Like it was a decent middle of the road horror movie. It's not going to be on my best of the year list. Not going to be on my worst of the year list, but like it's one of those movies that in like 3 years I'll have forgotten I saw probably.
Yeah, that checks out. I think
Yeah.
I'm with you on that one. Yeah, I don't know. I'm content just listening to my siblings talk about it and hearing stuff. That brings me joy. Apparently, they find a few things that they saw in the movie very funny, so that's cool. Yeah,
Love
I
that for
don't know.
them.
Well, my Halloween, I just went to a Halloween party that there was a lot of people at, and I was Dionysus, the god of wine. I drank wine, and that was more or less what happened. And then I went home and felt like shit for like 5 days, and now we're back, feeling free and
Yeah.
fancy.
I went as Amy from Gone Girl. If you need a point of reference, you can look on our Instagram because both of our costumes were on there.
Hey.
But I didn't really think it through because we were going to these haunted houses and then to a movie, and I wore said costume to the haunted houses in a movie,
Right.
and it was just me in a white dress covered in blood wearing a blonde wig, essentially.
Ah.
And do you know how fucking sticky I felt all night?
Ooh, that I believe. I heard, because did you use actual fake blood or did you like try to make it at home?
I used actual fake blood.
Apparently people who do like cosplays and stuff usually make their own because that's their main complaint, is that fake blood is too sticky to use.
Yeah, very sticky. Thankfully, it didn't dye my skin. That was the thing I was the most worried about.
I would have also been very worried.
But yeah, and then it got all over my car. Like my car obliterated in
Ooh.
fake blood. It's like washed out. And like funnily enough, because I covered a white dress in this fake blood, you would think that dress is toast. Like it's only bloody now.
Yeah.
I put it in the wash just because I was like, I don't want a sticky mess around my house.
Mhm.
And it like fully came out. Like that you would never know it was stained red.
Weird.
I was so impressed. I was like, what the fuck?
That is so bizarre. I've literally had clothes that I put in the wash that have gotten stained from the laundry soap. That's crazy.
It was crazy. I was like, damn, that fucking shit just rinsed out. And it, because I did like a test run the day before, like where I was just kind of like seeing how I wanted to do it, because we were going to be out of town when we were doing this. So I was like, I'm going to test run this at home.
Yep.
And so I left the like dried blood on there overnight and then poured more on the next day, and that shit still came out. I was so fucking impressed.
That's actually pretty good. Like, I think that's a nice trade-off, though. It's like super sticky when you're using it, but it does wash out of your clothes.
Yeah. I don't know. I would not do a costume like that again for what we were doing, because I just felt like walking outside through haunted houses while being just like sticky, not the vibe.
Yeah. See, I like that you brought up the dyeing thing too, because I have contemplated using face paint in the past to do different things, but I am so worried about having my skin be dyed.
I know, that was like my biggest fear, was that I was gonna be stained red, but it like thankfully didn't stain my skin at all, and so I was very happy about that.
No, that's great. What I learned from my experience is dressing up as the Greek god of wine, is that I really love not wearing high heels with a Halloween costume. So I think next year, I'm going to be a wizard, so I get to wear a long robe again, and then my Birkenstocks, because that was really cool. And then, yeah, I don't think I'm ever going to wear a sexy Halloween costume ever again. I have in the past. They're kind of fun for their own thing, but comfort-wise, not worth it. Mm-mm.
No. Yeah, I feel like I never wear comfortable Halloween costumes for some reason, and I don't know why I do that to myself.
Well, see, it's always the shoes that get me. Like, I pick something where I have to wear, like, a certain type of shoe, and then the minute I get there, I want to, like, rip the shoes off and throw them away.
Yeah, just not the vibe at all. And this is kind of a side note. I just got our wedding pictures back yesterday, and I was looking through them, and there's this one of Emily walking after leaving the ceremony, holding her shoes in her hand. I was
Yeah,
like,
I
she'd
did
taken
do-
them off already?
Well, what
She'd
happened
been
is that my
10 minutes.
heel, my because I had stupid little peg stiletto heels on those things, it got stuck in the cobblestones, and there was people coming up behind me, so I just ripped those suckers off and kept walking.
Oh my god, that's so funny. I was bursting out laughing at so many of the photos of
I think I was
us,
shoeless
because maybe
pretty much 100% of the time at your wedding. For sure, like 90% of the time I was not wearing shoes.
yeah, me either. And well, I mean, I took them off like the moment I could, because the fucking dogs were barking.
Woof, woof. Absolutely.
Whoa. But yeah, maybe we'll post one of the pics on our Instagram, because we got some really funny pictures of Emily and I. We both just look stupid.
Well, that's just how we look normally. I was like showing Andrew pictures last night, like of the ones that you sent me, and he's like, "How come?" He's like, "You don't look like this in normal life. Like, why do you always look like this in pictures?" And I'm like, "Because I'm not photogenic." Because that I'm just
Me
not
either.
Yeah, like real me is one person. Picture me, that's a different bitch. I don't know her.
Literally, I'm like, why am I sticking out my tongue
Yeah.
like an awkward person for like 90% of these? I'm just like,
See, mine is that I love to suck my head into my neck for some reason constantly. I'm just like, and I'm like, oh, that's cute. Yeah, wish I would stop
Wow,
doing that,
love
but
that
apparently
for
not.
literally. So yeah, that's great. I'm glad I paid lots of money to look like a fool. No, just kidding. I like them, but I do look stupid in like half.
I've learned that apparently that's just how it be sometimes.
It's just
how
what it is, you know?
Yep.
They're fun to look at. So,
Well, I guess
but
we should get into the episode.
yeah, our questions. I was just gonna say.
Oh gosh. All right. Yes. Let's get into our wheel of questions. So, what is your favorite ghost story?
Ooh.
It can be like a one you've heard from somebody, or like a fictional one, or like a story, like a actual like book story.
What's yours? I need a second to think.
Oh, I don't know about stories, but I do like the like different styles of hauntings, if that makes sense. Because I feel like once you like read or see enough things about like people having haunted houses or haunted whatever, there's a lot of like weird consistencies. I, for
Mm-hmm.
one, have always really liked the idea of like a haunted painting. Like specifically a haunted painting, not like haunted objects in general, but the idea like you move into a house and the previous owner left this artwork up there and it's got like a weird feeling and the eyes follow you. I feel like it's a very classic like ghost story that goes along with like, different things.
Yeah. See, I can't think of one specifically, and I'm really racking my brain for one now. But I like a ghost story where the ghost is like someone's murdered, and like they're obviously like dead now, so they're a
Yeah.
ghost, and they like somehow, some way, their ghost gets vengeance on whoever killed them. Like
Ooh, you like
that's my
revenge
kind
ghost
of
stories.
ghost story.
That's a good one. I do love a good revenge story, especially if the ghost is like somebody who was wronged in life and they get to like fix that in the afterlife. I do think that's pretty cool.
Exactly. Yeah.
Now you've got me thinking. I don't know. There's so many good ones. I feel like people are just so
There are.
creative when it comes to this kind of stuff. Like if they're just making shit up or they see something or whatever, there's just enough where they're like, wow, like that's really cool.
Yeah. I think there's lots of good options. I don't know why I can't think of anything specific right now. I feel
I think
like
it's hard because there are so many of them, but it's kind of hard to pick a favorite, especially when a lot of stuff does usually seem to be consistent. It's like having a lady in red or a lady in white, like being like a
mhm.
traditional ghost story that a lot of places use, or like what I was saying about the painting, like haunted objects is a really common one, or like having
I don't
ghosts in
know
the
if it
basement or the attic or something.
Yeah, I don't know if it counts as a ghost story either, but another one that I've always like been very intrigued by is the Black-Eyed Children.
Mm. See, that I think falls more into like supernatural, but then it's weird because sometimes people tell stories and it does almost seem like it's ghost children.
Yeah. So I don't know. I feel like there's a very fine line there where I feel like ghost stories and supernatural kind of get like
They
tossed
definitely hold
together a lot of
hands.
times.
Like the supernatural and ghost stories typically are like da, 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 walking down the street together.
Yeah, 100%.
Oh, for sure. All right, well, let's spin for our next question. It was kind of weak. Oh well. Um, what do you like about ghost stories?
I like the idea, like I think it kind of goes along with what I was saying about how I like revenge ghost stories. I like the idea that even in the afterlife someone could like still avenge themselves or like get some form of justice. But I think I also kind of like the history behind them. Like my favorite thing when you tell ghost stories specifically is always just like learning who the person was pre-ghost, I guess.
Yeah. Well, because it kind of
So
almost
I
is like a
think the
piece of the
history
puzzle.
of it
Yeah.
is my favorite part.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I was going to say something kind of similar, I guess. My favorite's the potential. Because with ghost stories, it's like, you don't really know why they're there. You don't know if there's actually a ghost. You don't know if it's something else. You don't know like you said the history. You don't know how the history ties into like maybe the idea of a ghost being there. Like what does this ghost do? Like does this ghost like everybody or certain types of people? It's just like kind of the mystery behind it that I really like and like how
Hmm.
and even like how there's so many unique too. Like I know I was just talking about some of the more common tropes between hauntings, but there are some situations that are still really neat, like unique to that area. It's like there's a ghost ship called the Queen Anne, and they have ghosts in there that will only interact with certain types of people, but you wouldn't know unless you're somebody who's there all the time, right? Like it's just stuff like that I
Yeah,
find really interesting.
that is super interesting. The kind of like why they haunt question.
Yeah, the why question mark.
Yes, exactly.
Oh, all right. Next question. So then what would be your least favorite ghost story? And since we kind of like been keeping it vague. I'll say even like a trope, since we did kind of already touch on that. Is there anything about ghost stories that you really don't like that you see? See, for me, there's just something about the idea of like I'll say least favorite, not in a subjective sense, but just in the sense that it gives me the heebie-jeebies, I guess. But anytime I read something about a haunting or somebody who's had like an experience that they believe is a ghost, and it's like, oh, they gave me like 3 long scratches down my back. That actually makes me feel kind of nauseous because I really don't like the idea of something you can't see being able to like hurt you in any kind of way.
I would agree with you there. Like, in the sense of like least liked in terms of what gives me the most heebie-jeebies
Mm-hmm.
is some like a ghost being able to actually physically harm you.
Yeah, and you can't see them, you can't do anything. And it's like, I know too, with like, say, ghost hunting shows, that comes up a lot because it's like they'll have encounters with something that they can't see that can like talk into their instruments that scratches them or does something weird to their mind. Or like, I used to watch like Ghost Adventures, for example, all the time. I think I
Mm-hmm.
made you watch it with me a couple times when we were in school. But like,
Absolutely.
it would be like things like that, or like they would get headaches or have memory relapses where they wouldn't remember what they told people or what they were doing, and just stuff like that. It's like, ugh, no, 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 no. The ghost can
Extra
talk to
spooky.
me. It can talk to me all fucking day if it wants to. Absolutely drawing the line at harming me in any kind of way.
Yeah. Like, that's just an absolute no for me as well. Like, well, I don't like the idea that they could actually like kill me. Like, they're dead. How can they kill me?
Well, that's the thing. I'm like, you're dead. Stay in your lane. Like
Yeah.
if you want to be here and pretend to make popcorn because that's what you did in your real life, and then go disappear somewhere else, do it. I don't care. Do
Yeah, live your
not
dream.
try touching me. That is enough.
Like, far away. Go make popcorn in the other room and I'll keep my peace over here.
Yeah, and we will live separate lives, and everything will be fine. But yeah,
Unless I'm the one who murdered you, in which case you deserve to murder me.
in that case, feel free. I deserve it.
It's an open playing field, you
And then
know?
suddenly the vengeance of 100,000 ants that I've accidentally stepped on in life come for my soul.
Ah!
Spooky. All right, well, let's spin for our last question. I think I gotta grease the wheel or something. It's sounding rough over there. Um, if you were a ghost, what would your story be like on why you're coming back? Or like what kind of ghost would you be?
Oh, I'm for sure an old Victorian lady. And I'm coming back because someone has wronged me and I'm there for revenge, for
I
sure.
saw that coming. I was like, "Oh, this is her moment. She's gonna be that vengeance ghost."
Absolutely. I'm there to fuck shit up. I have a list. I'm checking it twice. And everyone's gonna get fucked up if you fucked with me.
If
Just saying.
only if though. This is why you
If,
gotta be
yes.
nice.
Yeah, if you've never wronged me, you got nothing to worry about. I'll leave you alone. I'll make the popcorn and let you eat it. But if you fucked me up in real life, girl, better run.
That's really funny. What kind of ghost would I be? See, I honestly think I would be one of those ghosts that kind of just like fucks with people. Like I would just be bored and then like steal your pens or something and then be like, "Oh, you want it back? It's on the roof." like like just stuff
Like a
like
little
that.
jester ghost.
Yeah, but I don't know what if I had to pick like a time frame, I would want to be like an old western ghost. Like I want to be an old western ghost that just like fucks with people.
You died in a standoff. You were an innocent bystander
Yep, and then the
to
only
a
way to make me
shootout.
go away is to leave out an offering of a half a glass of whiskey.
That 100% is your vibe.
See, that's what
Now,
I'm saying. You're
without
like
being
that
a
could be
ghost.
today. Oh,
You
that's
want
really
your
funny.
pens? Give her some whiskey.
See, the exchange, cause and effect, guys. There's a reason for everything. Um, well, I guess I can get into my description here since we're doing a themed episode today.
Yes, so we are doing a little Remembrance Day episode today, and we're going to read you some Reddit stories of some war stories, some ghost stories. Yeah, we just thought it would be fun to mix it up a little bit.
Yeah, and since well, my thought was that I've already kind of touched on wartime ghost stories a little bit in the past. I believe last year and maybe even a little bit the year before. So I'm going to be doing strictly ghost stories as kind of like a continuation of, a little bit of Halloween vibes, but also keeping on par with like, you know, the essence, I guess, of Remembrance Day. And Jen's going to share some wartime stories because she hasn't had the chance yet to be able to do that. So it's going to be a real good time today.
Yeah. Well, get into your description and then we'll get into our stories.
Yes. So I was looking at my past notes and it looks like I already did a description for what Remembrance Day is on the podcast. So I'm going to do a description of what a ghost story is. So a ghost story is any piece of fiction, drama, or I deleted this part out because I didn't understand what the word was or how to say it. Or any piece
Classic.
Yeah, it's like, well, I looked up like what it meant and like the word was basically like, a ghost story is a piece of fiction, drama, or like a restating of events, like an opinion of events, kind of. Because they're not saying that ghost stories are real, but they are saying that people, will recount events as if they're real. And that's kind of what that word meant. So scrapped that one. And this generally includes a ghost or simply takes as a premise the possibility of ghosts or characters' belief in them. The ghost may appear on its own accord or be summoned by magic, and is linked to the idea of a ghost is also that of a haunting, where a supernatural entity is tied to a place, object, or person, and ghost stories are commonly examples of ghost lore.
Nice.
Yeah.
I hope that got you all real hyped to hear a ghost story.
Or ghost lore.
Yes, especially ghost lore.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, so I'll get us started off here today. So this is from Reddit user Amanda HRK. So they say, my grandfather, who fought in the Second World War, once told me a story that has haunted me ever since. My grandfather was an exceptional man. Born in crushing poverty, he took to a life of crime in his teenage years before straightening up and joining the British Indian Army, where he served with distinction. After India's independence, he won multiple national-level gold medals in wrestling and subsequently completed his education and started a successful trucking company. He had lived such an extraordinary life and spent his old age just reliving his memories with friends and family through his great storytelling skills. Us grandkids just loved to sit around him as he regaled us with tales from his well-lived life. He always seemed so joyful when he did it too. But there was this one story that he avoided telling any of us until he was almost on his deathbed. One story that has stayed with me even after all these years. I remember it like it happened yesterday. How his eyes widened and his bony hands trembled in fear as he recounted the most frightening experience of his life. Thankfully, I had a tape recorder close at hand, and I can tell you what he told me in his exact words. Well, isn't that just good luck?
Ooh.
So, are you sure you want to record this? Because it's not very pleasant. Okay then, just don't tell your mother what I tell you here. I don't want to be held responsible for any nightmares you might end up having because of this. So this all happened back in 1942 in the midst of the Arkhan campaign. The Japanese had pushed all the way to Myanmar. The campaign was the first offensive push by the Allied army to push the Japanese back. And let me tell you, it was a spectacular failure. We were not prepared for the attack. Remember, this is back when the Indians couldn't rise above the rank Subedar Major, and all command posts were occupied by the British. They had no idea what the fuck they were doing. They had little to no experience fighting in the muggy jungles, or our transport infrastructure, our supply lines were all pathetically weak. Hell, Bengal, that was supposed to be the launch pad for the invasion suffered a devastating famine just a year later. I'm sure you must have read about that in school. The Japanese, on the other hand, were fortified and carried out ambushes on a regular basis. It wasn't surprising to have the entire patrol squads get wiped out in the blink of an eye. The attackers would suddenly appear out of the shadows and disappear before help could arrive. It was terrible. We were all on edge at all time. Every branch that snapped, every leaf that got rustled, our fingers pushing against the trigger of our rifles. Compounding all that were harsh conditions. We were far more likely to be killed by disease than war. The food we ate was barely enough to keep us on our feet. The threat of malaria and dysentery always loomed large. Snakes, spiders, and other insects, larger than anything we'd ever seen, crawled on our emaciated bodies as we slept. Swarms of flies that looked like dark little clouds descended on the corpses of our brothers. It was hell. We were permanently covered in layers of dirt. Rain lashed on the forest at an alarming frequency, turning weather so humid it felt like our skin was starting to melt. The repeated spells of rain pretty much destroyed our communication lines, and the ground had turned so boggy that some soldiers had gotten stuck in them, right up to their thighs. It was so bad at times, command structure had completely broken down, and disorganized chunks of the army were operating almost independently from each other. It was in such a situation that nightmare appeared in our lives. One of the worst aspects of fighting in the jungle was the psychological warfare. The Japanese would kidnap our soldiers, torture them for information, brutalize them beyond what would be humanly acceptable, and then send them back, barely clinging to life. We could have never saved them, and I think that was the point. To watch our comrades, our brothers in arms, waste away in front of us while meager medical supplies could do nothing to help them. But it wasn't the worst of it. You see, one thing they delighted in doing was using our soldiers as bait to draw the rest of us out. They would torture our soldiers to the brink of death and tie them up in a tree, usually in a clearing, and hide in the forest. If we went out to help, they would pick us off from the trees. All we could do was stay hidden and listen to the agony-filled death of our fellow soldiers. Wait till the last drop of life was slowly squeezed out of them as they cried out for their mothers. It was one such incident that changed everything, or at least an incident that looked to have deceptively like a nightmare that we had gotten used to. James Wavell, a distant relative of Archibald Wavell, the then commander-in-chief of the British Indian Army and later viceroy, was in charge of us. He was the one who sent us out on patrol that day. There were about a dozen of us cutting our way through the jungle when we heard the screams. You see, in forests, it's actually quite hard to track down the source of a loud noise like that. If someone screams, it feels like it's coming from everywhere, like the woods are echoing the sound and speaking to you themselves, but not this time. Instinctively, almost on a primal level, we knew that the screams were coming from, and almost as if in a daze, we gripped our guns tight and in our hands and followed, or more likely, we were led there, if that makes any sense. It didn't take us long to find the man who was screaming. He was dressed in an Indian Army fatigues, or at least the trousers. His shirt was torn and hanging from his shoulders. God, this is hard. He was tied to a tree and his hands on his stomach, trying to push down his intestines that were spilling out like thick, bloody little ropes. Oh boy, that's quite the image.
It's definitely painting a picture.
And his screams, it's like I can still hear them. They're like still ringing in my ears. The pain in those screams, I could feel it in my bones. I began walking towards him before I even realized what I was doing. I felt a hand on my shoulder and was pulled back forcefully. I looked into the eyes of the man who pulled me back. They were wide open, alarmed, like he knew something was seriously wrong here. He shook his head slowly, warning me not to go ahead, even as the man continued to scream. I gulped and nodded. We spread out into the woods with our guns drawn, keeping each other in sight to brace ourselves for the Japanese ambush. I winced as twigs snapped underneath my boots. I realized I was afraid. Not of the Japanese, presumably hiding in the trees somewhere close to us. No, but the wounded man in front of us. It was so bizarre. I can't explain it, but it felt deep in my soul. Every fiber of my being was screaming at me to run away, to keep running until I left this man far behind me. I took up a position slightly to the man's left and began waiting for him to die and for it, whatever it was, to end. But it didn't. The man screamed, he cried, he sobbed, he called for help, but he didn't seem to die. Minutes turned into hours, and the sun began dipping beneath the horizon. He kept screaming. We stood rooted in our spots, unable to move, as if mesmerized by this strange performance. The moon climbed up into the sky, and the man's blood began gleaming under the white light that beamed down on him, but he still didn't die. My legs were aching, my neck was stiff, and I could hear someone to my right crying softly in terror. It was like we knew that it was not that man, but we were about to die, and then it happened. The man stopped crying. The world was plunged into silence, and I do mean complete silence. We couldn't hear anything. No birds, no crickets, no leaves rustling in the wind. We couldn't even hear ourselves breathing. It was like the forest itself was holding its breath. And then the man got up. He easily tore off the rope holding him in place and jumped up on his feet. His intestines hung limply from his belly, which looked like someone had punched a hole through it. Fuck, half his gut was gone. Just straight gone. I could see straight through it. No man can live through an injury like that, let alone be completely fine like he seemed. Do you see how scared I am right now? Do you see how my hands are trembling even after all these years just thinking about that night? So you can imagine how terrified I was when that man glared at me. His eyes shot up to mine like he knew where I was, like he'd always known where I was. There was such malice in his eyes I almost passed out from the fear. And then he screeched. It was loud and shrill, like thousands of babies screaming in our ears. I remember quaking in my boots just looking at the hateful snarl on his face. He began running towards me with these big, looping strides, covering half the distance within seconds. Thankfully, that sudden burst of motion had restored my senses, and I started running away from him. I dropped my gun, my backpack, and just bolted. I leapt over small rocks and overgrown roots, ducked under branches, waded through thickets, stumbled in the dark, but kept on running. My boots at one point got stuck in the soggy mud, but I pulled myself free and pumped my legs to keep running. I stole a glance over my shoulder and saw him gaining on me. Intensities slapping against his thigh as he ran. He was smiling, ear to ear, like the chase was the best thing to have ever happened to him, like he wanted to take his time and truly savor the hunt. Move, move, move. Must go faster, I thought. I heard the screams behind me, accompanied by loud tearing and squelching sounds. He was ripping the patrol squad apart, one by one, and soon it was going to be my turn. My lungs were on fire, each breath a desperate act of survival. My legs were starting to wobble. I knew I would not last long, but I couldn't outrun him. I could hide. I found this small crevice where this giant tree had been uprooted, tucked away in a dark corner of the woods. I scrambled for the tiny hole and cloaked myself in the shadows. I wasn't even thinking about snakes or some other venomous creature that was waiting for me in the dark. I just wanted to get the fuck away from that thing. I pulled my knees close to my chest, felt my heart hammering against my sternum, and waited for that thing to find me and put it all to an end. I heard his footsteps, slow, deliberate, felt the leaves shift and crunch underneath his bare feet. Then he began whistling. It was oddly melodious, like a bird singing an ode to the forest. I heard the fallen tree creak as he stepped on it and glided towards me. Dark drops of blood came crashing down on the ground inches from my feet. He called for me in my mother's voice. She had been dead for over 5 years by that point. Gently, with love, he called for me and laughed when I didn't move. I put my hands on my helmet, pulled it down in front of my eyes, and began crying as silently as I could. It was over. I knew I was going to die. But for some odd reason, he didn't kill me. Maybe it's because he wanted to leave one survivor alive, to go out and talk about him, spread the terror he had inflicted on our patrol squad. I don't know. I don't even know what when he left. I spent the whole night there alone, shivering in that little hole. Even when the sun came up and bathed the forest floor with light. I still refused to come out. Such was the extent of my fear. It wasn't until another patrol came across me that I felt safe enough to come out. They had to carry me back on a stretcher. I was delirious with fear, and every muscle in my body was exhausted, but I was alive. That was the closest I came to that thing, but that wasn't my only encounter with it. All throughout my stay here, I heard stories about it from my own regiment and others. Hell, even from the Japanese had supposedly run across it. This immortal thing that imitated voices, pretended to be wounded, and tore apart entire squads at a time, or how he came to you at night when you were sleeping, whispering utter hatred into your ears before dragging you away and slicing you to pieces. Some patrol squads discovered remains of corpses in odd places, like decapitated heads on top of trees or limbs splayed out in strange patterns near base camp. At one point, we feared we were losing more men to that thing than to the Japanese. I'm sure they felt the same. All the horrors I witnessed in that country, the air bombings, the disease, the burnt corpses, were nothing compared to that night. I remember how relieved I felt when we marched into Rangoon. Even with all the guns and artillery going off around me, all I could think of was that I was glad of that damned forest.
Well, you know what I actually think? Because, well, first of all, that is terrifying on multiple levels. I'm not going to get into it because we could seriously talk about this for probably the next 3 hours.
Yeah.
But you know what I find interesting about this particular ghost story that you shared?
What?
This is not the first time that I've heard of potential hauntings that, like, of something that's happened, especially like wartime ghosts, where they kind of evolve into something else. Because I guess, oftentimes with war and, like, when people who work in the military or whoever see ghosts, they usually aren't just ghosts. They kind of almost like, it's almost like there's so much hatred and, like, such a mixture of feelings, like the fear, the hatred, the, vengeance, the, like, there's just such a miasma of such, like, negative energy going on that for whatever reason, ghosts are never just ghosts in the military. Like, they can turn into something else. And so when you were like talking about this, I was like, that is so crazy.
Yeah. It's like some demonic creature that
It's
like
literally
kind of...
like, yeah, something taking advantage of somebody who died and maybe they came back, or like if we're talking from like the perspective of ghosts are real, it's almost like somebody's come back and something else came back with it or has decided to like bond with it and become something else. It's very spooky.
Yeah, it is very spooky. I don't know. I
Hmm.
feel like war is such a tumultuous time already that I could see why stuff like this would be more prone to happen because people are already on edge. They're already like
Well, and
stressed and
vulnerable
scared and
too, because like it's almost like if you don't have, it's not even a question of strength really. I think that you're just under such like mental warfare when you're literally in war that like if there is something like a demon or like an evil spirit around, yeah, I could totally see it taking advantage of people.
yeah. What I'm trying to say is war sucks.
Yeah. Well, definitely sucks. Um I should have prefaced this earlier with my ghost stories, actually. So, with mine, I got them from a website which shows only redacted ghost stories. It doesn't have the usernames linked, but they are all still from Reddit. So, unfortunately, I can't credit them because for whatever reason they deleted their Reddit accounts and they're no longer linkable. So, if this
Mm.
does sound familiar to anybody, let us know. We can give you a shout out on whatever your new handle is or any of that kind of stuff. But yeah, if we're good with that, we can get into my first ghost story.
Yeah, take her away.
All right, so I'll be talking from the perspective of the writer for this one. I think I will be for all of mine, but for sure this one. Um, but this is what they had. So they say the scariest ghost experience I had was in Bali Island. So, in the summer of 2018, a group of friends of mine invited me to a trip to a trip to Bali, Indonesia. It ended up being a trip of 6 women and 6 men, and I knew about half the people beforehand, and I got to know the rest of them on the trip. We went around the island, ate great food, enjoyed the views and culture, and we were all in our early to mid 20s back then, so we would always end the night with a night out at either a bar or a nightclub. I believe it was the third night in the island. After a night out, we were in groups of about 4 or 5, and we got a cab and headed back to our villa separately due to us all not being able to fit in one vehicle. I was one of the people that arrived in the villa latest, and I believed it was approximately around 2 in the morning when I arrived. My roommate had some friends decide that they were going to go to bed first, but I wanted to have a cigarette prior to getting ready to pass out in my room. Now, before going further into the story, in order to make this more clear to whoever's reading, I need to tell you about the layout of this villa. The villa's estate is rectangular, and when you enter it, you'll see an outdoor kitchen and somewhat of a living room that's outdoor, including a few couches and a TV and a statue of Buddha. Then there is a pool next to it that has 6 glass doors that lead into 6 different rooms, so you could open your room door and take about 4 steps to dive into the pool. Now, here's where I get into the story. So it starts with the deciding to have a cigarette part, which to me, I'm like, of course it had to be. It's when you're on your own somewhere else and no one else is there.
Yeah, that is classic for when being alone and spooky things happening.
Pretty much, yeah. So, for the record, I was not too intoxicated nor too tipsy at this moment. I decided to light up a cigarette in front of my room door, and I was looking around the ambient view of the pool and the living room space. The living room space was darker than the pool. Then I saw the shape of a girl sitting in the couch, but she was looking the opposite direction of me. Thus, I was looking at the back of her head. At this point, I didn't think anything weird, and I thought it was just one of the girls that had stayed in the villa with me. But then I got a chill all over my body because I did not recognize her hair with any of the girls that was in the villa. In this moment, for some stupid reason, I decided not to freak out and felt like I wanted to show that I wasn't scared of whatever this random thing was. And I decided to finish smoking the rest of the cigarette, and I threw it approximately 5 feet next to her direction when I was done. This was a bad decision. Then I opened my room door and I saw that my roommate was already asleep. For some reason, I was able to fall asleep quite shortly, and I don't usually get sleep paralysis, but maybe once per trip, or once prior to this trip I had experienced it. So I fell asleep in a position where my face was half in the pillow and half out of it, and on an angle where I could still see my roommate. Then I woke up and I could not move my body. The first sense was my sight. Then I realized I could not move, and I then felt something touching my cheek. It was black, straight hair on my cheeks, and I could only move my eyeballs to see. This was the most chills and panic that I've ever felt in my life as I tried to see what it was, sideballing my eyes as much as I could. Then I saw that there was a face that was also sideballing to stare at me.
I don't like that.
Yes. I was dying inside and my heart was beating like crazy. And I think that this girl ghost also kind of figured out that I was pissing my pants. Then the killer act was almost screamed her laugh with her mouth directly in my ears. So to kind of go back on that piece a little bit. So she's got her head on her side. The hair and the head is facing the same direction as her, but it turns to put its mouth by her ear and start scream laughing into her ear. And all she can see is black hair at this point.
That is horrifying.
It's vomitous. And the laughter was rapidly with the highest pitch of a laugh that I've ever heard. I didn't know what to do, but it was like my body was in fight or flight. I somehow managed to ball my fist, and then the rest of my body woke up. And then I was screaming, "What the fuck?" And I woke up my roommate as well as some of the other people in the villa. And then there was nothing on top of me when I finished waking up. I didn't get much more sleep that night, and people didn't believe what happened to me until we checked out the villa 2 days later, and I told this story to the security guard that was in charge of a few of the villas around the block. And he told me that across the villa, approximately, sorry, I'm just trying to make sure I didn't skip a sentence. I told this story to a security guard that was in charge of a few villas around the block. He told me that across the villa, approximately a 2-way road, it had a so-called kubaran, which translates to a graveyard for the locals there. Not sure if it was that or if I was just hallucinating for some reason, but it's a story I still tell people and freak out over.
Yeah, that's understandable. I would also be freaking out and probably never sleep again.
Yeah, I would also be shitting my pants because there is, I don't know how many of our listeners have experienced sleep paralysis. I don't really know the statistics of how many people do experience it, but I've only ever had it a couple times in my life, and it is a surreal, spooky experience. Because, like, there's nothing quite like having your mind be awake and your eyes be awake, but the rest of you isn't awake, and then it's just so scary.
I don't like the sounds of that at
Mm-mm.
all.
Mm-mm-mm. So that was my first ghost story.
All right, I'll get into my next one. This one's from Reddit user TH3RAMR0D. Don't know what that's supposed to say, but there you go. So they say, creepy at first, ended in a facepalm. I was a young sergeant in 2006 stationed at Fort Bliss. Right outside of Fort Bliss was a training area near the Biggs airfield. We were guarding some equipment overnight so the company wouldn't have to stay. It was me and one private. I told him he would take shifts patrolling, and since we were allowed to have cars out there, the other would nap in his car. I woke up to my soldier knocking on my window in a complete panic. It scared me at first. Private said, "Sergeant, wake up, there's UFOs out here." He responded, "What?" Private points in the direction, and sure as shit, I see these lights that seemed like they were floating around and then disappearing. Took me a moment as I just woken up. That's the Franklin Mountain Range. You're looking at the cars driving on the scenic route. The cars would be visible and then disappear when they went around the corner of a turn, only to appear again when they came back around. I was very agitated at first, but the next day it was by far the funniest experience I had in the military.
I love that because that's some kind of dumb shit I would do. Like, I would wake up and see something that's totally explainable and be like, oh my god,
It's aliens!
it's aliens! And it's just a car.
Yeah.
That's really cute. I love that. Oh boy. All right, so here's my next story. Um, so I'm hesitant to say anything because I've told this to people in real life, but kind of just get weird looks or scoffs about it, but whatever. I still want answers, or at the very least an explanation, or something I'm not even sure that I want, but I know I can't be the only one, so I'm just gonna say it. I am a 23-year-old female, so it's not like I have a bunch of crazy life experience under my belt, and I have yet, or sorry, under my belt, and yet I've still had a decent amount of ghost experiences and so many deja vu moments that it's driving me crazy because nobody seems to have them this much and to the extent that I do. But I want to talk about my most recent ghost experience because I'm scared and I still can't sleep.
I don't
Right?
like where that's going.
No. So last Wednesday night, June 22nd, or really Thursday morning, June 23rd, between 1 or 2 a.m., a light turned on in my room. I hadn't fallen asleep yet, and this is pretty common for me. I've always had trouble sleeping, and I've adapted to getting just about 5 to 6 hours every day. But a light turned on while I was facing the wall. It is not uncommon as I have a computer and other electronics that will randomly have a flash of light. I turn around to see if I need to turn it off or if it'll go away in a second, but then I froze because the light was red. A bright red color that nothing in my room could have made. And as I'm staring at my room covered in the red light, I suddenly see a shadow in the middle of my room. The shadow was tall, probably about 6 to 7 feet, with decently built long fingers. And
Ugh.
yeah, and this terrified me to my core. The cold feeling that went through me made me realize that this was not friendly, whatever it was. But
Whatever
then,
has long fingers is never friendly. I just
homie,
spoiler.
if you are an 8 foot tall shadow with long fingers, I'm sorry. I don't know if this makes me
Get out of my
judgmental or
bedroom.
like racist against ghosts. I don't want you in my house. Get out.
Especially not in my bedroom while I'm trying to sleep. Thank you very
Yeah, of
much.
all
You
times,
can
take
leave.
your red light and your long fingers and get the fuck out of my house.
Literally.
Ugh. Um, And then, yeah, so we got a creepy tall ghost with fingers. And uh, then there were footsteps outside of my room, and the door to the bathroom opened, then closed. And I figured it was my brother, as he does go to the bathroom in the middle of the night often. This shadow figure had disappeared at this point, too, and it was just the two of us in the house. So it couldn't have been anyone else. I moved to try to get comfortable and moved my eyes to my nightstand, and then I almost cried because there was a face staring at me from my nightstand.
No.
Okay, I'm gonna
That's
cry.
always my biggest fear.
Oh god, yeah, especially like you think you see something and you're like, oh thank god it was something else. You turn around, you see something worse.
No,
Absolutely
I just
not. Absolutely not.
no, it's not allowed. It should be illegal.
Mm-hmm. So I couldn't make much of its face, but it had white teeth, a weird smile, and the eyes were staring at me. And then I couldn't look at it anymore, so I turned back to the wall and willed myself to go to sleep because I couldn't breathe and I didn't want to see this figure anymore. Which it's so funny because I
Just
remember there was a
goes to bed.
yeah, well, there's been a couple times where like, especially in my parents' old house, like there was some creepy shit that happened in there, and it would be at a point where I would just be like, I hope whatever it was doesn't know that I'm awake, and I would just lay there as still as possible and be like, well, I guess I'm going to sleep. If I'm dead in the morning, they can figure that out. Good night. That's
Yeah,
a
I
problem
mean,
for
I
the
guess
police.
yeah, that's the logic, right? If I'm asleep, it can't hurt me.
I'm like, I'm in my bed. I'm in the safest place I know.
Get out.
Yeah,
You weren't
leave.
invited.
Oh God. Um, so the next morning, I asked my brother if he went to the bathroom between 1 and 2 a.m., and he said no, and that he was dead asleep the whole night. So not only did I see the shadow figure, but he was also apparently walking around my house. And the next weirdest thing is a few days later, I'm about to brush my teeth before going to bed, and my toothbrush and toothpaste were in the wrong spots. I have a very particular way of doing this, and I know that I just wouldn't mix that up. So somebody at some point was also in my bathroom who wasn't me. So again, in the morning, I asked my brother, and he denies it. Swore to me it wasn't him. So my question is, if no one else was in our house, then who was there?
Ugh, I don't think I would want to know the answer.
Nah, I'm good. Yeah. Eh, I'm like the living can stay the living, the dead can stay the dead in two very different places, preferentially.
Yes, and I'm going to pretend that what I saw was all a dream.
Yes, good night. Yeah. Like it's like that thing where it's like you're pretending to sleep and it's like me, 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 me. That's me.
Yeah, I'm asleep. This is not real.
My thing is like this is a problem for the morning.
When it's light.
Ghosts
Scary
can't get
things
you
can't
during the
hurt me in the
day.
light.
Yeah.
All right, so I'll get on to my next story then. So this is from user Wonder Dash Maker, and they say, I was working the night shift at an old SCIF, and that was originally built back in the 50s. I was starting to feel sleepy, so I went for a walk to wake myself up and ended up getting lost in a maze of underground tunnels. Finding myself in a part of the complex that obviously hadn't been used in decades. Everything looked like it was just left there and forgotten one day, eerily frozen in time. I was extremely tired and stressed out from work, and that really didn't help me to be able to rationally retrace my steps. Everything around me seemed like something was hiding in the shadows and watching me. It took a long time, but I finally made it back to my position and didn't tell anyone what had happened. Luckily, it was a night shift and no one noticed I was gone. A year later, we got a new guy, and in the middle of the night shift, he got up and went for a walk. A couple hours later, he came back looking like he'd seen a ghost. I just gave him a knowing nod and he knew I knew exactly what he just went through.
Ah, camaraderie.
Yeah, shared trauma.
That trauma bonding over ghosts. That's really what we're here for.
It's true. Honestly, I would prefer to not walk through spooky places at work that are probably haunted, so I can understand the fear.
Yeah, I think that jobs like that, like where you're working as security guard or, something of that nature where you have like a spookier part of a building that you're required to go to, that doesn't really speak to me personally.
No, like I was shooting in a prison, like like an old prison once that had been decommissioned,
Hmm.
and the security guard who like still maintained the building to make sure no one broke in
Hmm.
was like, yeah, this place at night is not nice and it's scary and you hear things you don't want to hear. And I'm like, oh my God, tell
You're
me
like,
more.
you're like a homie. Tell me everything, but also a therapist, and also maybe get a different job.
But also, we should leave and talk about this not here.
That's the thing, right? Oh God. Um. Yeah. No. It's like in the place of which you and I originate. I know somebody who, I guess their dad or their uncle works at the old institution that is like no longer
Ooh,
a thing.
brutal.
Yeah, and they do have a lot of break-ins, but like apparently that is definitely not the spookiest part. There is a little ghosties in there doing ghosty things. So
Well, I could imagine like a place like that where there would just be like a lot of like negative energy going around.
yeah, I think there's a reason why there's certain types of places that end up having weird ghost related or supernatural experiences, and it seems to
Yeah.
be old asylums, hospitals, graveyards, and old prisons. And I think that's probably for a reason.
I would 100% agree. All right, but take it away with your last story, Em.
Aye, aye, Captain. All right. So my last story for you is also, like I said earlier, we're trending with the talking from a personal perspective. So here we go. I'm in my early 30s, and this happened when I was about 15 years old. I don't want to get into how this happened, but ghosts entered my home. I was scared about getting up to go to the toilet in the middle of the night and seeing ghosts in the dark, and decided it would be best if I got myself a torch or a flashlight to use during the
A
night.
torch? How old is this person? Is this the
That's why I
1800s?
said or a flashlight, because torch is another way of saying flashlight. They
Oh.
don't mean like a medieval sconce. They're not just like ripping it off the castle wall and being like, "There's ghosts in this castle." I mean, they might
An
be.
open candle.
You see, they said early 30s. They meant early 300s because they're actually a
Uh,
vampire.
yeah, okay, gotcha.
um, yeah. So they decided to get themselves a torch, also known as a flashlight, to use during the night. And it was already nighttime and dark out, so I decided to head to the garage to go get this torch. I entered the garage, flip the light switch, take a couple steps, and then the light goes out, and I am in pitch darkness. The light switch itself did not flip. So I go back to flip the light switch, flip it multiple times, and the light won't come on. I go to my father to explain that the light won't work, and he goes to the fuse box. His response is, well, that's fucking weird. Somebody's pulled the blah 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 because the writer doesn't know what the heck he said.
Right.
So she's or she, they, he, I have no idea. Um, so it's well, that's fucking weird. Somebody pulled the blank out. I asked if it came out by itself, and he told me that's impossible for it to have come out by itself. So now that Dad's attended to the fuse box, I go back to the garage and flip the light on, take a couple steps, and then it happened again. So I go back down to the hall in the fuse box, and I go back to the garage, turn the light on, take a few steps, and it goes out a third time. So whatever this thing is literally physically pulling out a piece of the fuse box to prevent them from going into the garage.
Well, to prevent them to going to the garage with light,
Yes.
which is
So
extra spooky.
I was about to say, which is
Garages are already
significantly
haunted.
worse, in my opinion. Um, so they were like, well, fuck this. I'm not going into the garage if some ghost keeps trying to put me in pitch black darkness, which
Same.
that's valid. I get that.
Yeah.
And then they say, and I leave the garage. So the next day, my father, who's a builder, was telling his electrician friend who was on site about it. It freaked the electrician too because he knew that that thing on the fuse box cannot come out on its own. It has to be pulled. And there were many other things that happened in that house. You'd hear people walking around on the third floor when nobody was up there. And then they just cut it off. They never finished their story.
Dun dun dun.
Which is
I'm sure
kind
they're
of the
fine,
spookiest-
right?
I'm assuming so. I mean, their users deleted, so I mean, I hope they're okay. But I kind of thought that'd be like a nice little way to end is on a unfinished story because that's an interesting start to be like, oh yeah, um, ghosts entered my home and now they never finished telling what the ghosts were about. It makes me a little worried about them.
Yeah, if this is you, let us know you're okay, because we're
Yeah.
scared.
Yeah, I just want to know, like, did the ghosts get you? Are you okay? Do you still live there? What happened with the fuse box? I have so many questions.
Did you move?
Yeah,
'Cause I would.
same. Did they come with you? I hope not. What was in that garage?
Did you light the garage on fire for safe measure? Because that's what I would
Did you do your safety measures? Yeah.
Just like put the whole house in salt. I don't know.
Something. You gotta do something. But yeah, that I think takes us to the end of today's episode. As always, we hope you enjoyed our themed episode for today.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you would like to check us out on social media, we have a Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, all at We Love Crime. We also have an email if you'd like to email us and just chat about something, anything, which is wheelofcrime@gmail.com. We have a website you can check us out on too, which is www.wheelofcrime.com. We have a Patreon, which is also at Wheel of Crime or at Wheel of Crime Podcast on Patreon. If you would like to leave us a review on wherever you are listening to this podcast, that would be great. 5 stars is ideal. Obviously, I feel like as a listener, you're entitled to have your own opinions, but yeah. And then also, if you would like to submit a story of your own that you think is scary or interesting or crime related or spooky related, you can also submit through our Google Doc. We do have it up active on our Instagram, I believe, still. And we do keep that open, so if you are just listening through episodes and you're like, oh my gosh, I want to tell you guys about this random thing, we would love to hear it, so you can do that there. And I think that's about it.
That's it. That's all. And we'll see you next week for another new episode. Okay, bye.
Bye.